Well, hi there friends, this is Chris Bates, and what I thought I would do with this video is kind of give a little bit of a remembrance of a very special part of the 7A Ranch, which is known as Pioneer Town. Now, as I'm filming this video, my attempt is to post another video which shows a lot of the flood damage that happened, and I have that on another video. This really isn't a video to talk about that. This is just more of a video to remember some great memories that I have of this place called Pioneer Town. Now, as I'm filming this, I need to ask everybody who's watching for a little bit of forgiveness because my memory might be a little bit foggy and I might not get all of the details right, but I'm going to try to do my best here. And as we're walking through some of these places here in Pioneer Town, some of the shops that you see are basically just nothing but buildings set up for show, whereas others are actually buildings where you can go in and actually buy things, do things, etc. So we'll kind of take a look and walk down and see what we have here. Now, these buildings that you see over here that I'm filming, to my knowledge, are nothing but show. I don't believe there's ever been anything here where you could actually go in. You can see the Blue Chip Saloon. There's Schmidt Hardware. Let's see, what's over here? It says Smith's Leather and Bridal. And there's a post office. I'll talk about that more in a second. One of the things that I find kind of fascinating is that I don't know when Pioneer Town was actually built. I'm going to guess sometime in the 60s. But whenever it was built, from the 1960s, all the way up to maybe just a couple of years ago, everything looked exactly the same pretty much as it did back in the 1960s. And that was kind of fun because I want to say it was in 2009 I found some old pictures of my family around Pioneer Town, and I went ahead and I took some new pictures of my new family, and I made a calendar for my mother to where she could actually see, compare and contrast the two different pictures, and that was kind of fun. And I want to say maybe a year or two ago that they filmed part of a TV show here, or maybe a movie, I don't know exactly, but I'm thinking that caused them to kind of come renovate this place and give it a fresh coat of paint, and a lot of the little make-believe shops that you see here are actually new. And it's kind of sad and a bit ironic that so much care would go into making this place new right after the tragedy of the flood happened. Mentioned I was going to talk about the post office. The post office used to be here in Pioneer Town at a different part of the town. And the thing that I wanted to point out was that for years it was an actual post office. So even though it had this old frontier look, you could actually go into it and you could actually, drop off some postcards or some letters if you wanted to. That's what we did before the days of email. You would actually send postcards instead of taking a selfie and sending it through Instagram or whatever. You can see over here on the right is one of the little places that is still open from time to time. I'm not sure what it's called, Pioneer Gazette maybe. So let's kind of walk over here and take a look. This big building on the corner, which is probably the biggest building in Pioneer Town, used to be called the Emporium, and I believe now it's called the Cowboy Museum, and it is an actual museum in there. And back when it was the Emporium, it had a lot of old artifacts that you would associate with the museum, but in some ways it was kind of a gift shop as well. And it was always so fascinating to me to come here at night because you can't really tell now. You see that wood awning that's coming across. That's new. That was not there years ago. I think they redid that when they did the renovations that I talked about earlier. And they used to be these lights that would go up above where it says Cowboy Museum. It used to say the Emporium, and they would light up all at night. And it was so much fun to see. And one of my, I'm going to get a little sentimental on you here, so I apologize. I know a lot of you probably don't care, so I'll try to keep the personal story short. But you can see down here on the ground, of course this used to be cement, not wood. But you can see here how, as you move across to the left, it gets higher and higher off the ground. And what I would do when I was little, like about 2 or 3 years old, is I would stand on it 1 foot on the top, 1 foot on the bottom, and I would see how far along I could walk before my little legs would give up. And it's just one of those silly little memories that everybody has. So moving over here, you can see some more shops. You can see over here we have the ice cream parlor, which is still, it's closed right now it looks like, but I think it's still in business at times. And I'm guessing when they filmed the movie a couple years ago, they kept the ice cream parlor because it actually still generates revenue. Speaking of revenue, let's come to my favorite place growing up, which was then known as the Arcade, now known as the Family Center. And let me tell you what, back in the 70s, this place was always packed with people. Always packed with kids, because there was really nothing else to do here. Remember, this was before the internet, this was before Wi-Fi, this was before YouTube, this was before the cabins even had televisions in them. So this was the place to be. And it's still open for business. It's kind of, oh gosh, I don't want to sound mean, but it's not really, it doesn't really hold the same appeal to kids nowadays as it did back in the 1970s. And I remember growing up when we would come here for a week, my father, who was a very, very, very frugal man, he gave me 5 nickels a day to use in the arcade. And that was all I got. And if I used up all my nickels at once, well, that was just too bad. Now, the ironic thing is, even though it was back in the 70s, there was only one machine in here. I remember it was a pinball machine that was a nickel. Everything else was at least a quarter. So even though we're talking 40 years ago, inflation, everything was at least a quarter. So my 5 nickels didn't go very far. But that's just how it was growing up. But again, always tons of people here. I can still hear the jukebox playing. I still remember some of the songs. Born to be Wild, Steppenwolf. What else do I remember? I remember hearing ZZ Top, whatever the popular songs were in the early 1970s. And moving along here to the left, this little place here that you see that's Feed and Grain. Actually, for one time in the history of Pioneer Town, probably just a few years, believe it or not, there was a miniature golf course in there. It was a 9-hole golf course, very, very tight, very, very compact, but it was always a great place to go visit, and I'm not sure how long that it lasted, but it was always a lot of fun. You see there a little carousel that I'm thinking has probably been there since the 1960s, although I don't know for sure. So we're going to walk down a little bit this way. You see in the background another opera house. And to my knowledge, that was an actual real opera house that existed, I want to say, in Waco. And however it works, it was transferred here back in the 60s. And they used to actually have real live shows in the opera house. I'm going to get a little closer so you can see these little signs here. You can see one sign over here says the Melodrama. And then over here to the right you see this sign that says the Gay 90s. Of course, talking about the 1890s. You have to remember this was the 1960s, so when anybody said the 90s, we weren't talking about the 1990s, obviously. But these were real shows that they had here. The Gay 90s was Monday and Friday nights, and the Melodrama was Thursday nights. The Melodrama was put on by some local acting guild, but the Gay 90s was actually put on by people that were actually employed here. And I remember we would come to the shows, even though it was the exact same show every year pretty much, we'd come to it every year. And I remember the senior Mr. Sekas, I don't even know his first name. Back then you never called anybody by their first names when they were older than you. So Mr. Sekas, who was the founder and original owner here, he was a big part of the show. And I remember his son, I want to say his name was Raymond. I could be wrong. Raymond was a very, very big part of the show. And I always remember Willie Higgs, the piano player. Plus they had dancing can-can girls, all sorts of things. And I remember Willie Higgs and the senior Mr. Sekas would get up and they would do a routine and they would tell the same jokes year after year. And the great thing about it is they recently made a DVD available of that show, and of course I had to buy one, and looking back at it, it's kind of funny how humor has changed, because the jokes that were so funny back then really didn't seem so funny